Hi, today I thought that I'd like to talk about the importance of tensioning your cotton when knitting your beaded skirts. Now, if you've got loose tension, the problems that you may encounter are that your stitches are going to be loose and sloppy and you'll end up with holes in your work, that your bead isn't going to sit nice and tight in between the knit stitches, and so you're going to get cotton on either side of your beads, or that your skirt is actually going to be much larger than the pattern intended. Also, with loose tension, if you're knitting a skirt like this one in front that has quite a few hanks in it, over time, because of the weight of the beads on the cotton's going to actually drop. Now, if you've got loose tension, this means that your skirt's going to drop even more so than what it would do if it was actually like a normal tension or a tight knitter. So just keep that in mind. Now, talking about tight tension, I was actually a very tight knitter when I first started, and my needles actually ended up looking like divining rods. One of the problems I found was it was very difficult to move my stitches along my needle. And also I found that I usually started the row and would be very tight on the first stitch, and as I worked along my row I would be much looser at my last stitch. And the problem that this causes is that when you actually go to sew your seams together, it should be the other way around, sewing the wrong sides together that way. But when I came to sewing my seams, I found that one side of my knit was actually much shorter than the other side of my skirt. And so when I was actually sewing the seam, I was actually having to pull and tug one side in to actually fit nice and tight, neatly I should say, in with the other. You may not think that this is much of a problem, but if you've got a pattern where your loops need to actually meet up, you're going to find that you're going to have puckers where you're actually pulling and tugging at your work to help it to fit to meet the other side. Also, this skirt in front is actually made with two panels. You knit the front panel first, and then the back panel or the front panel. They're knitted separately anyhow. And the reason being that if your stitches aren't the same tension all the way through your row, you're going to find that when you come to actually put these two panels together, they're actually sewn up the side here. If one's shorter than the other, you're going to find, like I was saying, you're going to pull and tug to actually get them to sit nice and neatly. And you don't want to find that you've got puckers in your seams, because this just detracts from your work and you don't get the enjoyment out of it. You're going to put it at the back of the cupboard because you're going to think to yourself, it's not something that I really want to show anyone, or you'll be looking at it thinking, I wish I'd done it differently. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you actually how I tension my work. I'm not saying that this is how you have to do it exactly, but all I'm trying to say to you is that it's something that's worth considering when you're knitting your beading skirts, and just to give you a starting point. So I'll get rid of the girls and I'll come back to you and show you how I actually go about it. Now I'd just like to show you how I actually tension my work as I bead. I actually take the cotton through my ring finger on my right hand and my little finger. I take it around my little finger. I pop these two fingers over the top, and you'll actually start to feel that the cotton's starting to be tensioned now already. I use this finger here, my little pointy finger, to actually flick the cotton around the needle when I'm working. Now let's get into position. I'm going to talk now about how you actually hold your needle, and I actually cradle my needle between my thumb and my pointy finger on my right hand. And the reason I think that this is important is that as you knit, let's do a couple of stitches first. If you're going to put your needle into your stitch and then you let it sort of hang around here in the twilight zone while you're actually taking your cotton around your needle, you're going to actually be stretching the stitch that you're going into. And this is what causes holes in your work as well. So think about cradling your needle in between your thumb and your finger. The needle is also supported by my pointy finger on my left hand. This thumb, I just place my work and it just sort of pinches my work, not tightly but firmly, and it just sits, my thumb just sits underneath the needle just to give it more support so that you're not moving your stitches around and making them too large and loose and sloppy. So as I go, I just knit away. I use my left hand to sort of push my work along the needle. Now if you find that you can't actually move your work along your needle, then your tension's far too tight. And when I first started, I was such a tight knitter, my needles actually looked a bit like divining rods. So I've gotten a little bit better over time, and you should be able to still move your stitches along your needle. And this is about the right tension. Oops, my needle's a bit long there. So now I'm going to talk about how I actually knit and tension while I actually bead the row. Now for your beaded row, move some beads up towards your work. You won't be able to pop them right up against your work because you actually need some cotton here to be able to knit your stitches. Tension your work like I showed you before. Actually, it's easier for me to actually pop my needle in first, move my beads up, tension, I'm ready to go. This pattern calls for me to actually knit two, slip one bead. I actually move my thumb out from underneath my needle and help me move the bead along. Once it's in position, I knit. Now you'll notice that when I move my thumb out from underneath my needle here, this needle doesn't move very far at all because it's actually still supported by my pointy finger and my thumb on my left hand. As you're knitting and you slip one bead, if you find that your bead's not sitting nice and neat up against your work when you go to put your cotton around, just take this finger and just brush the bead and lock it into position before you actually slip the stitch off the needle. Now because this work at the moment, because I'm doing this video, is a fair way away from me, when I'm actually knitting, my work is much closer. And what I tend to find is that this end of the needle, when I'm actually taking my thumb away from the needle, this actually can be supported by the front of you. I just place it sort of so that it sits just on my chest. And this just acts like a bit more of a support for the needle, especially when you're getting quite a bit of work on there with quite a few hanks. It tends to get quite heavy, and this can just add a little bit of extra support for the work. So just move another one into position and knit. Now I hope I've given you something to think about for your tension. I'm not saying that this is the absolute correct way of working. I'm just saying that you really do need to look at the way that you tension your work And if you've got any other helpful tips about any beading as far as bead knitting goes, feel free to pop them in the box below, because we always like to know what other people have got to say. And if you've got any questions, feel free to email me at beadingbells. So thank you very much for your time, and happy beading.